G'day, legends. I hope you are having a fantastic day and so far a brilliant week. I'm here with one of the most highly requested guests for my podcast, Mr. AMK Mapping. Mate, thank you for joining me, and how are you?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm really well, thanks, mate. And I will say you've grown to a lot of popularity very recently due to, I think, a lot of the reality of a war like this protracted attritional phase and the byproducts we see of this now coming to the forefront. What I've been interested in is, I know of your work, of course, and my audience knows of your work, and your audience is growing exponentially, is how did you find yourself in this form of work?
Well, I've been obsessed with maps and anything to do with maps pretty much my entire life, and I've always wanted to make something out of that. And I started following the war in Ukraine basically from day one. I did video reports on it on YouTube back in 2023. That didn't really gain much traction, so I started posting my maps to sites like Twitter, and it just kind of grew from there. And I adapted and changed formats and tried to make it as interesting and educational as possible. Basically what I wanted to do was I wanted to be able to combine multiple of my interests into a form of work which could really help other people understand things easier, I guess. Visualize it, I guess.
But I think it's gone away from just mapping too, that you've
Oh
become
yeah.
you may have started with the maps, and that's how I came to know you and the maps that you make and, use in comparison to other maps. But then, of course, this has evolved into analysis, both in political sectors as well as tactics and strategy also.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. I didn't used to talk much about strategy when I first started, but yeah, I've definitely started mixing that in a lot more, doing other forms of covering the situation. Yeah, definitely.
And what have you, I guess, learnt through this experience? Like, how do you then educate yourself on the ability to analyze maps, analyze areas and situations?
Well, I take information from a lot of places. I guess I educate myself through, well, just media in general, just looking, watching, reading, looking at things, seeing how things evolve, and then applying that later on with changes depending on changes in the situation from then to now. Um, and yeah, and I just build up a good list of reliable sources and contacts which I can cross-reference and yeah, apply to the situation.
Hmm. And as you've got bigger, of course, you'll end up getting more sources both on the ground. I know you've got sources reporting information back to you in frontline areas too. How reliant on those human sources are you compared to more open sources? What's sort of the balance there?
Open sources, I would definitely be well over 90% reliant on. I don't have any contact with soldiers fighting, just residents living in cities in Ukraine. I mainly use that info for aerial attacks and yeah, consequences of those attacks. Um, yeah, not very reliant on them. They're more of a supplement to the information I already have from various open sources.
Yes. Yeah, and just mixing it all as one, then
Oh yeah,
creating the maps and looking at the lay of the land and the terrain. I think that's something you do well, is looking at the terrain and where actions may take place or future actions.
yeah. The topography is very useful for analyzing how things are going, what Russia's trying to do in a given area, and what they may do in the future.
And of course, we know this war is, there's the first and foremost, the battlefield war, but then there is, of course, the informational war, both in print, online, and TV, from private bloggers through to bloggers I think are definitely funded through some state media, and all through to politics and how that influences. And you can be a polarizing, controversial figure in the information space as well. And I think I have found myself in somewhat of the same boat as saying, like, look, this is where I sit ideologically, but I'm not going to let my own bias influence how I report on the realities that we are seeing in this war.
Yeah, no, I can definitely relate to that. It's the information space is so saturated by misinformation and manipulation of information from both sides, and it makes it difficult to traverse and difficult to know who to trust in your information. And obviously, bias affirming media is always going to be the most popular, or at least for I guess perspectives which have a lot of people believing in them. People, when you have a lot of people who believe one perspective and some group, some person is able to cater to that audience, then that group is gonna, or that person's gonna gain a large following, probably a lot of money too. It's a good incentive for them. So it gets really difficult to traverse.
Yes, and of course that information and that propaganda, this can change too dramatically with how the state of the war is at the moment. Now, I have been reporting for some time that when you have a side on the front line which has the initiative at the time, that they tend to then over embellish, and the side of which doesn't have the initiative, you tend to see fabrication. Now, this isn't to point at one or the other. You could point absolutely at different stages throughout the war and different wars. Do you agree with that? And that's what we're seeing in the informational space?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I see it quite a lot actually. I have to say I do see the Russian side. They do fabricate to an extent, but not on the same scale as what we see from the Ukrainian side. But yeah, for the most part, yeah, I definitely agree. I agree with that. Yeah.
And in an informational space, of course, that, as you and I have gone over, is very difficult. There's a lot of misinformation, disinformation being pushed. How do you then traverse this?
Well, the most important tool I use is kind of the age-old tool of cross-referencing. Just don't put all your trust into one source. Don't put all your trust into one person, and blind trust. I can't stand it. So what I do, I cross-reference. I compare with what other people are saying, their reliabilities. I look at visual evidence. I look at, for frontline changes, I'd look at satellite imagery, other data which has been gathered, shreds of OSINT gathered information, and try to put together the most accurate picture possible from there. And I guess it does mean that some reports can be a bit delayed, maybe by up to a few days. But if you were to go with just one source or one group of sources who may be right and may be wrong sometimes, you'll be a lot quicker in your reporting, but you will be a lot more inaccurate. And I like to try to find that balance between being as accurate as possible. Well, obviously always trying to be as accurate as possible, but also trying to not be weeks behind on updates,
Yes. And how often do you find, sorry, I need to take this phone call for something. Hey, mate, sorry. I have to apologize. I had to take a quick phone call in the middle of the podcast. I'm the next of kin for someone who's going through an operation today, but the operation apparently went really well and they're recovering great. So that's good news.
That's good.
Yeah, that is good. But no more interruptions, hopefully. So we were talking about, was it cross-referencing information? And then what I wanted to ask you was, how much does then just applying rationale and logic go into a lot of your analysis and reporting? Because on my end, there's a hell of a lot of that I look at and I go, you'll hear me use a term, Occam's razor theory. And a lot of medical practitioners use this of, if someone comes in with a sore throat, you think common cold or flu before you think esophagus cancer. If you see hoof prints in the desert in Australia, you think horse, you don't think zebra, but you may think the opposite depending on the country that you're in. How often do you use that to look at information when you've got mixed reports and go, well, what seems to be the most likely scenario here, and therefore at least start picking at that thread?
Yeah, well, it depends on the situation. I mean, on the sector or all the context of it. If I'm doing, like, for example, a map update in an area of the front where there's not much information, satellite imagery may be clouded over, so I can't look for combat-related fires or additional changes in terrain texture. I might go and look at past trends, look at different updates or shreds of information I have managed to gather, and yeah, updates that some sources or bloggers may have published, and yeah, apply logic and I guess general trends to it to try and shape it in a way which is the most accurate possible. So often in those situations, I'll be a lot more conservative with my mapping. I won't, like, if there's one source or even 2 or 3 sources saying, oh, Russia's advanced this far in this area, like let's say 3 kilometers, I would map to an area where there is, which seems logical and highly likely based on the information I gathered, but not to the point where it is likely, but still quite a bit of room for doubt and needs further verification. Yeah, essentially kind of like that. But obviously in other sections of the front line or other contexts, I would be a lot more liberal with my mapping and yeah, be a lot more, use those trends a lot more, yeah, a lot more liberally, especially like an example now would be Eastern Zaporizhzhia or Western or Eastern Dnipropetrovsk, the Pokrovsky direction, where the front's moving a lot right now. I could easily map off slight changes in deep state's gray zone, you know, but yeah, some other areas it's a bit different.
Yeah, well, that front line right there, that is very different with the nature of the movements and seemingly the porosity of the fortified areas that are sitting. You typically, in my audience, you'll hear me speak. That's like the Velika front line out to the west that is sweeping across sort of the top of Huliopol. On this though, of like gaining information, seeking information, the informational space, and I will say you push back a lot on Twitter with other people pushing information. What sort of threats or what's the word I'm looking for? Amount of threats is probably the correct term. Have you actually received for doing this, releasing? Because I see a hell of a lot of pushback at you from typical figures in this, but specifically at you, your age, who you are. How much tension do you feel there is in this informational space, and is it growing?
Well, for me specifically, yeah, I do get a lot of things that what you could consider threats. A lot of very obvious threats. Most of it's through DMs and sometimes in comments. Yeah, threats of death, threats of doxing, threats of emailing or messaging family members or yeah, anyone related to me. Yeah, lots of stuff like that. The vast majority of the time, it amounts to nothing because it's just simply threats, empty threats. As for others in the information space, I know there are a lot of other people who receive the same threats, both neutral, pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian people. And yeah, it's just another tool in the kit of informational warfare that people use and like to exploit. And yeah, fear, I guess that's one thing that people like to use. It's give people the idea of fear, a deterrent, or the idea of fear to deter them from reporting what they don't want you to report, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. And have you seen that one side or the other has a larger reach or more of an open nature to not only criticize, but then just sort of go after you as well?
Well, you mean like for me, like which side is more likely to do that?
Yeah, I'm not meaning like carry out something against you, but as far as will go and will try and undermine your work, and go and attack your character as well.
Oh yeah, well yeah, I mean, considering the situation right now, it's definitely the Ukrainians or the pro-Ukrainians. I like to use like quotes and pro-Ukrainian because they're not really pro-Ukrainian, but yeah, the pro-Ukrainian / anti-Russian side, yeah, definitely they're more so than any other group. I'm sure you've seen the online groups like NAFO and other troll farms, and yeah, they're far more likely just because of the situation. They need to take certain, or they feel they need to take certain measures to mitigate the consequences of what's happening that they can't change.
Yes. And it is funny, you use a term in that I've used myself, is there's a very big difference between being pro-Ukrainian and anti-Russian. Now, I'm not saying that both can't exist at the same time, but I think a lot of these accounts, these people, even to politicians, that they will happily have an extinction of Eastern Ukraine for the vanity of killing more Russians or the information of this in the future, and that they're not concerned about where the future for Ukraine, for Kiev, for the people goes, as long as it's reducing Russia's potential.
Well, yeah, and they make it really obvious too for anyone looking at it objectively. I mean, when you see tweets and stuff about how Pokrovsk served its purpose by killing X amount of Russians, them claiming whatever 300,000 Russians or whatever the new claim is. Yeah, you see people claiming that, and they don't even mention the amount of Ukrainian soldiers that would have died or been not even known that had died after being vaporized by a glide bomb. They don't even mention the amount of lives lost holding such a city despite such terrible conditions, and I guess asymmetrical, not I would say asymmetrical warfare, but asymmetrical in terms of quantity in this attritional war. Yeah, you don't see them talking about that. You don't see them showing any empathy for the soldiers. I mean, I guarantee you the majority of soldiers holding Pokrovsk, if they heard, this random anonymous person on Twitter who's never never left his country in his life, saying Pokrovsk wasn't strategically important, it served its purpose, it's no longer a logistical hub, it killed 100,000 Russians, they would feel betrayed, because it's like, no, I've been holding this city this whole time because I know it's important to me and my homeland. I remember seeing a lot of reports from before the battles for Pokrovsk began. A lot of people fighting for Pokrovsk lived in Pokrovsk, which I found quite surreal. And you get all these people who have no idea what they're talking about online, pushing these narratives about how anything Ukraine loses all of a sudden doesn't matter anymore. And it's like that's like the opposite of pro-Ukraine. You'd think, like an outside observer looking in on that, they would just see that as not caring about Ukraine, simply just caring about how many Russians died. That's like the metric for success now. How many Russians did we kill in the city? That's the metric for success. They're almost treating it like guerrilla warfare, how that and often will, like in Gaza, for example, where groups in Gaza would always celebrate deaths in the IDF and focus on that more than anything else, really. It almost seems a little bit like that to me.
Yes. Yeah, it is something very interesting to see. And you'll see even today, you will see people calling for massive reinforcements to be sent into Pokrovsk. And it's like this zone in my opinion, and in many other analysts' opinions, is crossed an event horizon of being saved, but you're just pouring more and more into this. And all you're seeing is a focus on, as you put, on casualties on the other side, rather than actual sound strategy or tactics, as well as the costs that it takes to do this. And of course, we see in these, say, NAFO style accounts that you'll see all this online, and that you'll see I'm fighting the war online. And what I say is, well, Ukraine has a crisis, a manpower crisis at the moment. And that is what's leading to a lot of what we're seeing at the moment. I'm just wondering when NAFO Article 5 is actually going to be enacted after 4 years, and these that say they are fighting for Ukraine are going to actually, I guess, go and fight for Ukraine.
Oh yeah, and yeah, the NATO as a whole and those like it have done, in my opinion, irreversible damage to the reputation of Ukraine, the pro-Ukrainian community, anyone who's affiliated with Ukraine. They've done it, yeah, irreversible damage to the reputation of that, and it's going to be looked at after this war. Once the war's over, it's going to be looked at, and people are going to be like, "How on earth did they reach that point where they are saying these sorts of things?" It's going to be, I reckon, it's going to be studied how much how brainwashed some people were, or so many people were in this war. I mean, it's reached incredible levels that, even 2 years ago, I wouldn't have thought, these levels of delusion would be reached.
Yeah, well, people will pin me as a Kremlin shill, as this or that, without realizing, or they may realize and put off, that I've spent 7-8 months total in Ukraine, both pre and post invasion in 22. And I've got many dozens of friends, both Ukrainian and foreigners, but Australians or Americans, of which I know are fighting on the front lines too. Civilian friends, military friends, and I've had, sadly, many that have perished in this war as well, yet trying to actually just cut through and be like, I know there's information war, there's biases, but at the end of the day, this is as I see the reality on the ground. And you're attacked for saying, if you say right now, hey, look, casualties are probably not 10-1 if you've got an overmatch and superiority of fires at the front line, you're probably not having a 10-1 casualty value, that is instantly, you may as well work for the SVR and a Kremlin talking point.
Exactly, and it's all about labeling anything that disagrees with the assumed narrative on the war, the assumed narrative that Ukraine is killing 10 times more Russians than Ukrainians dying. They are bleeding out the Russian economy. Russia's going to collapse any day now. That's Ukraine's going to go in and liberate Crimea. Anything that goes against that narrative, anything that calls into question any of the points made, is immediately labeled as Kremlin propaganda, no matter how logical or straightforward the disagreement is. It's just immediately labeled that way, and no one can seem to look at things, at least in that space, no one can seem to look at things objectively and from like a bird's eye view. Like, no one can remove themselves from that space and temporarily just look at things from above and try to understand, okay, separate yourself from this bias and try to get an actual idea of what's truly happening. Because obviously, bias is going to manipulate how you view things, or how you take in media and reports.
Yeah, one of the big ones that I see is with this, especially because in my opinion, the pro-Ukraine side is far more outspoken on English Western media, so YouTube, Twitter, X, Instagram, etc. And one of the things I see with this is it's incredibly powerful. It's outspoken. And what I see on the back end is I see a lot of analysts who don't want to actually share what they believe. And they need to sort of sugarcoat it and put blue and yellow colored glasses on in any of their reporting for it to firstly be published in any of these think tanks, or maybe to reduce the amount of flack that they get online. And this is where, you'll see me fairly occasionally sharing, this is from an analyst behind the scenes, this is his analysis of the situation. And the very funny thing is people saying, well, if I want to be published by my think tank, I have to trickle in bits of like information throughout it to fit that, even if it is just analysis of a situation, as well as what I will say is, I have the I have the privilege of knowing a whole bunch of different people behind the scenes, both public figures, or many would know. And I know for a fact that what they'll say at the pub is significantly different to what they may say online, just due to, I guess, it's audience capture, but trying to reduce the amount of flack that they cop online as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you see it even in the most I guess, yeah, it's the most egregious of those on the online space. I mean, I'm sure you've seen Denis Davidov or Denis Davidov, whatever his first name is. You know, the YouTuber. I've spoken to him privately. He used to use me as a source for his videos last year. I've spoken to him privately. He says he speaks very, very differently about Ukraine and his beliefs about Ukraine than he does online. And I don't know if you saw just last week or earlier this week, he published a video on his much smaller second channel about criticizing Zelensky, the mobilization officers, the TCC, and the how bad the situation is in Ukraine. And obviously, it's all sugar coated and still, you know, dripping in bits of, I guess, rosiness into it to try and paint it slightly better. But it's even that is very different to what he says to his wider audience. And then still different to what he says to me or what he said to me. So it is very interesting seeing that for at least that one person. And my thoughts are, if he is, you know, knowingly lying to his audience, and other people are knowingly lying to their audiences, how many of these people in this information space aren't as stupid as they may come across as online? How many people are actually know how bad the situation is for Ukraine, may think that the war is lost, but then continue to push this online? And I feel like a lot of those people have kind of done what I've done, where they've slowly or over the last few years have started to change their opinions about the war, about Ukraine, about how it's being fought, what's to come. How many of them have changed their opinions over the years? Their opinions have evolved, and they just haven't changed what they've said online. You know.
Sorry, you go.
And and for me, I've tried to make my reporting reflect my evolving opinions, and yeah, I wonder how many people have had this similar situation to me.
Yes, well, I've shared over the past couple of years, Adelaide University, which is where I live, the maths department there, nothing to do with the war, but the maths department, as part of a study, they looked at how bots interact online. And this is nothing to do with, are you pro-Putin or pro-Zelensky or pro-Ukraine, pro-Russia? All they looked at was these different hashtags of, I stand with Zelensky, I stand with Putin, blah, 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 to see how bots interacted online. And I was very interested in this study. And I caught up with actually the people in the maths department, these like full-on geniuses, to have a talk about this. And I really wanted to do a public interview with them, because I said, look, at the end of the day, I did maths at high school, but this is beyond me to try and interpret this information beyond what I can read in this. And they said, look, we did one interview, and the amount of backlash we copped saying that, the sides in this war are using bots to push narratives. We're not like, at the end of the day, Willie, I'm a maths guy. I have no interest in that, but just trying to present this because maths is the most unobjective thing in the world. This is why people will go 1 + 1 = 2, regardless of what language you speak, regardless of your religion. We all agree on that, and we can't believe the backlash we got. But it's very funny to hear the AMK, Mr. Davidov. I never knew you guys did anything together.
Well,
are we going to see more there?
well, I watched him since like late 2022, from around the counteroffensive time, the Kherson-Kharkiv counteroffensive, and back then things were a lot better. It looked a lot better for Ukraine. I mean, I wasn't as experienced in knowledge about the war back then, so I'm sure any analyst who knew a lot more than me would have still predicted the events today and which will come. But for a lot of people, it seemed a lot better for Ukraine. They had just retaken Kharkiv. They'd just retaken most of Kherson, or northern part of Kherson Oblast. They were pushing back in Donetsk, and there are rumors of a new counteroffensive to Crimea, and things were looking a lot better. Russia hadn't mobilized yet. Well, they did shortly afterwards. They did their partial mobilization. And yeah, a lot of people gained a lot of audiences, a large audience from that. And as things started getting worse, people didn't change. And people like me started moving away from those people like Davidov who, you know, lied and or manipulated the truth. Then all of a sudden, like literally like 6 months later, I got a bunch of people messaging me saying he was using me in his videos. I was like, that can't be right. There's no way. I've been so outspoken against the Ukrainian information space even back then. And yeah, it was interesting. And then he messaged me one day saying, you know, thank you for your reports. I really appreciate it. Your maps have been useful for my updates. He used them for maybe like a month or so. We messaged a few times back and forth, nothing like long form. He was telling me about, you know, his grievances against Zelensky and how he really doesn't like the Zelensky government. Never really did since around, I think, 2020, he said. And yeah, and then he unfollowed me on Twitter. He stopped using me in his videos, and then he messaged me saying, I can't keep using you in my videos. I don't think you're pro-Russian or you're spreading Russian propaganda, but it just doesn't fit the type of content I'm trying to put out, and it just doesn't sit right with me posting maps. You know, I guess he means like maps which don't really go along with the other maps he uses, like Deep State or Mayakovsk. So yeah.
I think people too, they need an understanding also of how much incentive financially that there is, especially on YouTube. Of course, I don't tweet basically ever, so I don't really know the financial incentives on Twitter. I only speak from a YouTube aspect. I think people don't understand how much money a lot of these creators have actually made online. And I'm pretty open and transparent that from my experience on YouTube, that people make approximately, very approximately, but about $3 per 1,000 views.
Yeah.
Now that can change depending on your location and of course length of video. Of course, I'm infamous for having 50-minute videos of me talking whatever, but it tends to be about USD, say about that maybe per 1,000 views.
Yeah.
And what I say to people is typically what I found is whatever views you get on the day, you typically get double due to older views on older videos. And I don't think people fully grasp that a lot of these channels at times were getting, say, 500,000 or 600,000 views per video being put out, therefore probably over 1 million views a day, I would say, and that they're making thousands of dollars a day. And that's not taking into account Patreon. It's not taking into account any other links. And then host-read ads. Host-read ads can either be a flat rate or they can be a CPM, so off 1,000. Typically, that CPM sits between, say, 11 and 15 USD for an host-read ad. So I'm not a maths whiz at all, so we'll just do on simple numbers as possible. But let's say you put up a video that gets 1 million views, and of that you will get, say, $3,000 to $5,000. If it has a host-read ad in it, you're talking $12,000 to $15,000, $16,000. This is a lot of money, and a lot of these larger creators, they do not, you know, I won't mix up. They have made millions off this war. We're at day 1,000 and whatever at the moment, easily turning 1,000 or more a day. This is forgetting super chat donations, whether it be PayPal, whether it be merch or whatever. There is huge,
sponsorships too.
Sponsorships, yeah. And of course there is massive financial incentive in this as well. And I think that is a forgotten element in this is that people go, look, I'll push this to maintain an audience because of, you know, the financial incentive or lifestyle creep that now you need to continue that level of finances. It's a very crazy thing, and that has huge influence as well.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at his page now. Davidov, for example, 700 million views.
Yeah,
like, I mean that's enough money to live off for the rest of your life, essentially.
Like, yeah. Now I'm not I'm a marketer capitalist. You know, go for it. But I think there needs to be too, when we're speaking about war. If you are saying things of which you may not wholeheartedly believe, well, you need to look at that, the ethic in that too. I say, like, I'm wrong as much as anyone else is, but I say what I believe to be absolutely true at the time, and try and educate myself on it. So we see, and as well, you know, it's your countrymen at war. That whole thing doesn't really sit well with me. I wish that I could bloody inherit $1 million, demonetize all of my content, and just go from there. I think that would be the most honest way to do it. What do you think of the deep state map?
Well, deep state's interesting because I remember looking at them every day back in 22 and 23, and they were very reliable. I think it's because Russian advances were very slow and crawling back then, around Bakhmut and Avdiivka. They were very, very reliable. They were often the first to report a lot of things. Since then, it's obvious they've had a lot of pressure from the Ukrainian government as things got more difficult. Deep state is easily the most viewed and most used mapping resource for Ukraine in the world by far, more than Syriac, more than ISW, more than any of those sources. And they get a lot of coverage, especially from Ukraine. I mean, they get a lot of viewers, especially from Ukraine, from the West, from Russia even, and they naturally influence a lot of decision making, even on the ground. I mean, for example, quick example is with the Dobropolia breakthrough Russia did. Deep State almost immediately mapped 2 large pincers out, and then a lot of commanders have credited Deep State for the reinforcements which were eventually brought in to, or quickly brought in to counter that breakthrough. A lot of people did, credit Deep State because they were the ones, although it had already been reported, Deep State publicized it to such a wide audience that it just became impossible to ignore. But yeah, since 23, 24, early 2024, they've gotten a lot less reliable as they get much more and more pressured by the Ukrainian government, to the point where you can almost consider them the MOD map for Ukraine. And they in some sectors they are very good at their reporting, I'd say. Like, for example, I say very good, better than others. Like, for example, in the Pokrovsky direction or the Huliapol direction, they will update relatively quickly, sometimes even quicker than any other mapper. But then you go to Liman direction, and they've still got a 12-kilometer grey zone, for example, for something crazy like that. I can't remember the exact number. A 12-kilometer grey zone where people like me and most other mappers would have Russian control right up to Liman or even into Liman. And at Pokrovsk, for example, they are mapping very far behind, where Ukrainian commanders are coming out and saying Deep State's grey zone should be marked as red. And in fact, in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinions, the red zone goes far beyond Deep State's grey zone in the Pokrovsk direction and other areas around there. So another example, Konstantinivka direction, they still have Ukrainian control over a lot of those villages which have been Russian for months, with geolocations confirming it. Siversk, I mean, they so many sectors of the front line now, they are just very, very behind and obviously delaying updates, and while updating other areas. And it seems to me they are trying to, for what I've gathered, trying to keep the monthly kilometers squared down and try to keep it as leveled as possible with each month, to try and, hold back updates, and then in the next month start slowly filtering through those updates to try and keep those numbers for each month relatively static to each other, to create the illusion that Russia's advancing at the same rate the whole time. That's kind of what I've gathered. I could be wrong, but from looking at their updates every single day and tracking every movement of grey zone that they do, it does kind of come across to me that way.
I've had the exact same observation as well, that it seems to be delayed into, say October. You get these delayed updates, you get the 200-kilometer squares, and then when you hit into the new month, being say November, you will then actually filter through, you'll get some of the updates from last month, and then it will slow down again. That is something myself and many others have observed. And I've said, the thing is, with this map at the end of the day, with this war, at some point you're going to have to pay the piper. because at some point it's going to stop somewhere. And these mappers, whether it be a pro-Ukraine or pro-Russian mapper, we're going to know exactly where the front line sits. And that's going to be the ultimate barometer of mappers who were accurate or not, is if one map is 1,000 kilometre squares behind than where the others are. That will be very interesting. But I think, too, this is playing into something you and I were laughing about off air, was about linear warfare, and putting them as the linear warfare bros is to maintain that narrative, because that seems like a very important narrative at the moment, that it's going to take X amount of years before then Russia reach whatever. Now, what I say is, and you and I both had this observation, and we send it to each other, is it's funny that the linear warfare bros are now actually proving themselves correct, because you can find tweets 6 months ago that say 700 years, 600 years, blah, blah, blah. Now you'll find tweets today saying 150 years. And what you're saying is, well, either in the past 6 months, 550 years have passed, or war doesn't move in a linear or constant trajectory.
Yeah, and I don't really understand how people reach that point where they're using that as an argument, even for people who don't know much about how war works. It just doesn't seem logical to me how they've managed to trick themselves into believing that, for those who actually believe that. Because yeah, obviously there are so many factors which influence war. It's not going to be one straight line constantly, like a snail pace. Like, have you seen the snail argument where, oh, if you placed a snail by the Russian border in Luhansk in 2022, it would be in the center of Poland by now. Russia's advancing 10 times slower than a snail, whatever the numbers are. And people use that as an argument to say why Russia's going to collapse. And to me, it just feels like the bar is being set lower and lower for what can be considered a good talking point. Because, 3 years ago, people were talking about a third of the Russian Black Sea Fleet being destroyed, the flagship being sunk, and that was a big victory for Ukraine. But now all of a sudden, it's really, the bar's really being lowered as times get more desperate.
Yes, but the linear warfare thing, this is what I don't understand, is if you believe that war is won and lost by kilometre squares, therefore you are basically bragging that you're just losing more slowly. Because you could go, well, then it could be 1,000,000 years, but you're never taking back Donetsk. If you're going by that way,
the argument is that they make is that Ukraine fares better in a war of attrition than Russia because they have Western support, and that Russia's economy will collapse before they can reach Kyiv or whatever. Which, the mental gymnastics you have to do to reach that is insane.
Yeah, and this is where the war has taken this change massively at the moment. Now, what I've said is this has been the plan for years. It just hasn't been publicly accepted as the plan. Is no one ever speaks now about Ukraine having military victory, maneuver victory on the front. No one speaks about that. What they speak about is that what we're going to do is raise the cost to such an astronomical level for Russia that then they pull back. No one speaks of, like they used to, about we'll get delivered these armoured vehicles, therefore we'll conduct this operation and push back. No one speaks about that because I think there's been a wide acceptance that even if it's not public, but there's an acceptance that that's not going to happen. But the way to victory is to raise the cost to such an astronomical level on Russia. This is what we'll see. And firstly, history as far as the costs that Russia or the Soviets is willing to lay down in time of war is astronomical, and I think people misunderstand that. What I say is, even if you go by the Ukrainian KIA, WIA figures, even that would suggest that Russia has a hell of a long way to go, and that figure is likely greatly inflated. But that is the way forward. And now we see, of course, the new Wonderwaffe is attacking oil, because, of course, a lot of the Kremlin's money comes from that. Will we see that? I don't know. As I always say, attritional war, you're attriting yourself at the same time. You're just trying to attrit yourself more slowly. But as far as that this is, the final nail in the coffin, well, we've heard about final nails in the coffin before, whether it be from chips from washing machines through to whatever, and it just hasn't been the case.
Yeah, and with the UAV attacks, the drone attacks on oil refineries, it's always interesting seeing how misinformed a lot of people are about that. I mean, there's so many points, so many factors that point towards the oil refinery strikes not having a significant long-term effect on Russia. I mean, if you look at one example is the drone warheads. To get those massive aircraft type drones, the Liu-T drones, to fly hundreds, even over 1,000 kilometers, you have to sacrifice the warhead size for, to be able to fly that far, which means the warheads are sometimes as low as 20 kilograms, from what I've observed. And to a massive oil refinery, if you hit an oil refinery once with a 20 kg warhead from a drone flying very, very slowly compared to a lot of other drones, and then the fire's put out sometimes within hours, those oil refineries are then put up, back to full capacity within a week even, or a few days sometimes, or sometimes a bit longer. But it's, and then people will say this oil refinery does this much, produces this much oil, or refines this much oil per year. This is its capacity. Therefore, Russia has lost this capacity from it. And the manipulation of that is quite extensive, I have to say.
Yes, there was a gentleman at the Koganey Endowment Eurasian Centre. He wrote about this, that you can't. The TLDR is, if this refinery that produces or refines 5% of oil gets hit by a drone, you can't then just say 5% is now off the cards permanently. That is just not how that operates. And I have another guy in my audience who he works for a gas company in Australia. And he's spoken to me and he's like, look, I know nothing about war, but he said the way that these facilities are built, the entire facility is built to deal with an explosion or with something or with fire, because of course you're dealing with a highly flammable substance that the fireball you may see, but this is specifically built to try and stop then spread of that as well. So it may look more spectacular in the beginning than it actually will cause damage to said facility. Although, of course, these are taking more damage than we have seen in previous years.
Yeah, and one good example of that was, I forgot the name of the refinery. It might have been I'm trying to remember which one it was. It might have been the Ryazan refinery, where there was this video of one Ukrainian drone striking it after a large fire was already burning there. So at least 2 drones. And the fire was absolutely enormous, like hundreds of meters. The flames were hundreds of meters tall, or 100 meters tall, and it looked like massive parts of the refinery were ablaze. And then 3 days later, satellite images were released, and it was like 2 black specks on 2 parts of the refinery. And yeah, it looks so spectacular and enormous, like it looks like the whole thing's about to blow up in the video. But then when you look at the satellite imagery, which is published after by Ukrainian channels, it's very underwhelming. And it's, interesting to see that.
So, of course, we're speaking today on the 6th of November. I know this is changing very quickly, but what is your take on Pokrovsk as of today?
Well, like the current situation right now.
Yeah, the current situation, that choke point that has been made between Rodyansk and then northern Pokrovsk, and the situation of what you're seeing evolve and deteriorate there.
Well, right now, what I think a lot of people don't realize is there are hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers trapped, and those Ukrainian soldiers, I estimate maybe 500, give or take a little, trapped in the city of Myrnihid, which remains mostly under Ukrainian control. The surrounding villages, Svitler, Rivne, Sukia, Lysivka, and all those fields and fortifications, as well as the eastern edge of Pokrovsk. It's probably around 500 soldiers. They are trapped. The vast majority of those soldiers are either going to get killed or captured. Most of them are not going to escape that pocket. It is way too late for that. There is about a maybe 1 to 1.5 kilometer corridor of open fields and a couple of tree lines, which is a gray zone, by the way. which Russia obviously has full drone superiority over. DRGs can operate there relatively freely. Serhiy Stirnenko published a video showing some of the drone strikes on Serhiy Stirnenko, the Ukrainian nationalist, very war hawky guy. He published some of the videos showing some of the Russian FPV drone strikes on Ukrainian vehicles trying to move in and out of the pocket. And logistics, that was a few days ago, probably even longer ago. That now it is impossible. I don't think there's any movement in and out of that pocket right now. Those soldiers are trapped, basically. It is effectively a siege. It's just not physically cut, technically, even though it's surrounded about 97%. The rest of Pokrovsk, the northern part of Pokrovsk, is any remaining resistance there is cover units. They are not encircled. I'd say most of them will be able to escape. Obviously, there's a lot of Russian drone coverage, but it's not too much different than other areas of the front line right now. But that Murnohrad area, that Murnohrad pocket, the sub-pocket which recently formed in the northeast of Pokrovsk, separate to the rest of the pocket, that is, the soldiers there, I can guarantee you they are either going to be, unfortunately, they're either going to be killed or they're going to be captured. A few may be able to infiltrate out, as is with this war, but the Ukrainian command betrayed them effectively. They betrayed them to try and hold those two cities for as long as possible, and have wasted hundreds of soldiers in the process. And we've seen this before with Sucha, Avdiivka, Vuhledar. What else is there? There was, almost
you can even speak of Bakhmut. It was in a little bit different situation, but Bakhmut at the end of the day was being held at the end for vanity, not a sound tactical decision or strategic decision.
Velika Novosilka is another example.
Velika is a great example. Yeah. Well, Velika, sorry, not to cut you off, but Velika that's a good example. Velika and Vuhledar, they're good examples of the cascade following this. And a good example to go against linear warfare bros is the front line near Novu Alexandrivka to the west of Velika at the moment on that front around Huliapol. October the 1st, 24 is when Vuhledar fell, if I am correct.
Yep, that is right.
And now that front line is halfway between there and Zaporizhia. And you go, well, actually, this is what we see in 12 months. If you believe the war is going to move in that is significant.
Yeah, and they're bypassing all those major defenses now, all those fortifications which were built for years and are incredibly strong, which is honestly why I don't understand why Russia's doing these attacks near Stepnohursk in western Zaporizhia, towards Zaporizhia city from the south, because I have to say they're being very unsuccessful and quite incompetent there. But either way, that is an example of that. And and Pokrovsk, I think there's a solid chance that we'll see a repeat of Avdiivka Ocherdetene, where they break through, do a large breakthrough towards, I say large, local breakthrough towards the Dobropilya area. And a lot of the Ukrainian units have already been pulled out of Pokrovsk to Hryshine, which is just to the northwest of the city, where they are mounting a very strong defense. But Hryshine, for the past year, it has been bombed daily by glide bombs for a year straight. Drones, artillery, MLRS, mortars, every single day it has been bombarded more than almost any other settlement in all of Ukraine. And that's because it lies on two major supply routes and into Pokrovsk. And it's still being bombed because now it's turned into Ukraine's main stronghold. So depending on how that holds and how well the withdrawal on the rest of the remnants of Pokrovsk to the north does, and how well Ukraine's current counteroffensive in the Dobropilya salient, which is pretty much being eliminated now, depending on how well they do from there, we could see Russia begin to wrap up the front from Novopavlivka, so in Dnipropetrovsk, all the way up towards Dobropilya, kind of almost like swing up to the north and begin attacking those western Donetsk cities. Yeah. So it's Pokrovsky is either going to be a really quick and obvious collapse, that local collapse of the front line, or it's going to be delayed somewhat by Ukrainian forces being redeployed to that sector to try and hold back and delay as much as possible, and then we'll see a big break.
It does seem like Ukraine is not willing to let that Pokrovsk-Mirnograd area fall. It does seem like there is a redeployment of forces and deployment of some forces into there to try and attempt to save or rescue an area of which, from my analysis, has crossed the event horizon of being saved. But there's a lot of people online, of course, who are saying that no, it's actually the Russians who are in a trap here. And, there's going to be a counterattack that's going to vertically envelop the Russian prongs here and free Pokrovsk. What's your take on those that say that? I see a lot of maps with big arrows on them.
Well, they're completely wrong because they're misinterpreting the goal of the Ukrainian counteroffensive or counterattacks in the former Russian salient to Kucherov Yar. They're misinterpreting that as an operation to unblock Pokrovsk. In my opinion, what that operation is for is its goal is to mitigate the consequences of the fall of Pokrovsk and Leningrad. Because I don't know if you remember before, Russia had a big, salient all the way up to Zoloty Kolodyaz and even the highway. They were northeast of Dobropilya, which was that's going to be a big issue for Ukraine once Pokrovsk and Leningrad fall, because all of a sudden that whole section of Donetsk Oblast can be enveloped and essentially consumed. And now that those counterattacks are taking place and that salient is largely, if not fully, gone, the Russians are going to have to do a lot more work to actually exploit the fall of Pokrovsk and Leningrad. They'll have to do a lot more work on the flanks. They'll have to possibly develop Konstantinivka direction a bit more and the Novopavlivka direction. And it's a lot more complicated than it would have been, because before they could have used that salient to develop things further. So it definitely has tactical importance, the Ukrainian counterattacks and delaying the consequences of the fall of Pokrovsk. But people are massively misinterpreting that as a breakthrough to the south to flank Leningrad and save the garrison. And well, obviously, according to them, there is no garrison; they're not encircled. But to save the city and hold Donetsk longer.
Yes, and you use this. You use the word like garrison there, and that according to them there is no garrison. This is where I say that if I was sitting in Pokrovsk and a lot of my mates had been killed and I'm there fighting, and then these pricks are online with flags in their bio saying that there is no garrison, this is not an area of concern, I'd be there going, what the hell is this bloke on about? Like, what? I'm actually here fighting and I'm not getting out of this sector. This is insane. That goes back to the information betrayal that we spoke of earlier. But I think it's very clear from geolocations from most maps that show this area there. It has gone from what has been a crisis for a number of months to a catastrophe. And we've seen, I think, it shows the level of concern actually at HQ, seeing that Ukraine is willing to risk two of its most rare platforms, as the UH-60s or Black Hawks, as well as GUR operators, to attempt something on this southern area. What's your take on that operation with the GUR Special Forces and the Black Hawks landing in that sector? Because I know you were very early to this.
Yeah, well, early on it looked as if there was one helicopter used on the attack. It looked as if it was one single PR kind of attack aimed at capturing a couple of industrial buildings, possibly raising a flag somewhere. It didn't look enough to unblock that whole area, because there were a lot of Russian soldiers concentrated in that large industrial zone on the northwestern edge of Pokrovsk. And they but then we had that other video come out, 2 helicopters flying across, and later on it was verified that there were indeed 2 helicopters used by that video, which was published by the GUR yesterday. So that first helicopter, I analyzed that footage very, very closely. I geolocated every single clip from it. Some of the really zoomed in ones, I was able to match it to a specific set of coordinates, and I was able to identify which soldiers died where by numbering them and looking and comparing the number of ones which were hit to the ones which were spotted elsewhere in comparison to the geolocations. And if all 11 of those soldiers which took part in the landing were killed or wounded, I'd say, from what I've heard, it seems it's a minimum of 7 were KIA, and the rest were wounded and probably weren't going to be evacuated, probably captured, and or they died of their wounds. Or as for the other helicopter, we haven't seen footage from the Russian side of it yet. We've only seen the GUR's video showing the attacks on a different industrial building. So they landed essentially in 2 different areas, attacking different areas of that industrial zone. And people falsely misinterpreted that as the same, like both those helicopters landing in the same place and attacking the same area. Therefore, it's proof that the soldiers on the first helicopter were not destroyed. So they landed in different areas. They attacked different points. The first one, we know all of them were KIA or WIA, and the second one we don't know yet because we haven't had that other perspective of how the attacks went.
But nor have we seen it actually have a meaningful effect on the front either. We don't know the perspective and what has happened, but nor have we seen like a clearing of an area pop up.
Exactly, which is what leads me to believe that other attack also failed.
See, I have a different take on these choppers as far as what the mission was. From my background, working, of course, in the Australian Infantry, working with people who are in the Special Forces, as well as many friends and understanding of that, this is not the level of operation you do to unblock that. That's not the tasking. I am still, as I said on day one of this, I'm still very on the side that there was a level of exfil of something or infill of something. That's where I'm sitting on that. Is my question would be, and of course we're never going to find out the answer to this, but is who are they trying to get out of that area? Because at least, and I know the Ukrainians are not the Australian military, but if we saw that operation and it was Australian run, the unblocking operation would have been done by infantry, by your traditional combat corps, your infantry, artillery, and armor. Larger numbers, different way of taking ground like this, and your specialized forces, they'd be there to either infill or exfil someone or work as a force multiplier with your traditional forces on the ground, like your infantry. That whole op, to me, being the risk to the platform, the risk to the operators, the weapon systems of which they were carrying, I don't know. Something seems off to me, because even down to the amount of firepower they could have ever actually come in on a chopper is absolutely limited. So in an infantry section in Australia of 8, where you'll carry 2 machine guns, belt-fed guns, that is 80% of your firepower. The actual amount of firepower a 12-man team or 11-man team can actually deliver is still very limited, especially with your AR style platform assault rifles. It just seems to me it's like maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of these conspiracies around trying to pull out X or Y or whatever, it may not be as grand as that, but that operation to me just seems off. A small team, highly mobile in choppers, relatively undergunned, absolutely, compared to where you're going. Is this an in-out op to exfil or infill something? I don't know. That's just my 2 cents on it. And I guess if more information comes out, maybe it'll prove me correct or incorrect. And as I've spoken about Pokrov's, the situation there, what other areas of concern do you have that are being currently overlooked?
I'd say there's 2 main areas right now. Le Mans is one of them, because there are a lot of advances which aren't being reported, and there are a lot of advances which aren't being covered extensively. And the Russians are advancing there quite quickly. I mean, I'm just looking at my map now. I measure it. They are now 25 kilometers, 26 kilometers even west of the Jedabets River, which they crossed. I think it was beginning of this year, if I'm correct. That area has developed very quickly in recent weeks. That Le Mans is going to be captured, I think, sooner than a lot of people expect, as it is trapped behind the Siversky Donetsk River. All the Russians have to do is cut the last few supply routes into the city, and the Ukrainians will either pull out or they'll do another Murderhard. And the Russians are well and truly have the initiative here. They have a massive superiority in manpower, and the Ukrainians aren't putting up the adequate resistance to hold the flanks of the city. And I think once that happens, the Russians are going to be very close, scarily close to Slovyansk and the main Ukrainian logistical hubs, such as Ryhorodok, I think that's how you pronounce it. And might have to see a withdrawal happen from Siversk, which will play into the development of other fronts further south. So I think people should really be keeping an eye on Le Mans and Siversk, as they are very intertwined, those two fronts. And the other area is the Veliki Burluk direction, which is what I like to call it. The area between Vovchansk and Kupiansk, in that pocket up near the international border. There is a massive area, I'll measure it now, there's a massive area, or at least part of it, which is around almost 4,000 square kilometers. Very few villages, very few roads. It's all concentrated around one main logistical hub, which is Veliki Burluk. It's very far separated from the rest of the front line. Logistics is difficult, and they have to cross the Siversky Donetsk River even to reach that. It's essentially one giant bridgehead, which is incredibly more complicated to reach and supply. So I think with these developments happening around Vovchansk, with that city set to fall soon, the offensives around Kupiansk, the earlier incursions over the border, international border, are linking up the rest of the Oskil bridgehead. As that area begins to develop and envelop the Ukrainians in that large salient, I think we could see some very, very large movements, much larger than people expect, happen in that area. It might even be the first major, really, really visible shifts of chunks of territory changing hands that we see in this war before even any areas in Donetsk go lost, before even a large scale collapse happens. So yeah, I think that's one area that people should really be looking at now, and especially early to mid next year, as depending on how Kupiansk develops and how the Ukrainian counterattacks there play out, and how Vovchansk especially plays out, we could see some big movements there. And in my opinion, I think it also partially explains why Ukraine tried to blow the dam in near Shebekino in Belgorod Oblast, because that's right behind the Russian positions in Vovchansk, possibly to delay some larger actions there. Because all the signs right now, and for the last kind of 6 months even, have pointed towards some big and I think unexpected movements in that kind of bridgehead area.
Yeah, that northern sector, that is definitely something I believe to keep an eye on, as areas are still opened up there. And as well, as I go through the attritional warfare, the nature of war is to extend. If you have a force of which is smaller than yourselves, it makes sense for you to want to extend the front line and thin the forces to create crises in other sectors. This is why the Kursk operation was at August last year. It just never made sense to me, because you are, as the numerically inferior force, extending the front line dramatically away from other areas. And of course, then a few months later, we saw that then the costs of that then being paid with the movements that occurred down in the Donbass.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at places like Vovchansk from 2020, May 2024 is when Russia did the incursion to Vovchansk, and simultaneously to Lipsy. everyone was shouting about how Russia's going to try and take Kharkiv. Even pro-Russian accounts were saying this offensive is going to change the war. They're going to go for Kharkiv city. Pro-Ukraine accounts were saying Russia's going to try and take Kharkiv but fail miserably. So setting the goal falsely. And me and a bunch of other people who were looking at developments in other parts of the front line were looking at it and like, this has got to be a diversionary to an extent. Like, the Russians are pushing here to stretch and thin, probe and extend the front line, force Ukrainian reinforcements to be pulled from Donetsk to there. That's exactly what Ukraine did. They fell right into that trap, and sure enough, two weeks later, whatever it was, the Russians achieved a second consecutive breakthrough to a town called Progress in the Pokrovsk direction, which eventually develops a envelopment of an entire section of the front line, stretching from Volodar to the areas west of Avdiivka, which cascaded to Pokrovsk over the following months. And I think that Vovchansk operation was incredibly successful for the Russians. Even though they weren't able to take Vovchansk, not only did they secure an incredibly crucial section of the Donetsk Oblast area, as well as some of the last pre-war fortifications, and reaching Pokrovsk's outskirts to begin the offensive on the city. Not only did they do that, they also managed to waste important Ukrainian resources. Ukrainian marine units were redeployed to Vovchansk, and they spent weeks, almost, I think it was up to 2 months, attacking in Vovchansk, trying to retake some of the destroyed residential areas. They attacked in Lipsy, lost some armored vehicles there. They wasted a lot of resources on areas which are recaptured by the Russians just weeks later. And that Russian Vovchansk operation is incredibly misunderstood about how successful it was. And now, obviously, this year we saw the Sumy incursion, and the first thing I said for the Sumy incursion is this is an exact repeat of Vovchansk. The Russians are not trying to take Sumy. They are trying to take a small section of the front line against the border, mainly to stretch and thin Ukrainian units, trying to stretch them to the limit and pull reinforcements away from Donetsk Oblast. And sure enough, we saw more movements in Donetsk Oblast right after that, around Pokrovsk, Liman, and Konstantinivka. And not only does it do that, actually also those incursions, they also serve the purpose of preventing future Ukrainian incursions into Russia. Because if you don't remember, I don't know if you remember, but Vovchansk was the main staging ground for the RDK and the LSR, the all-Russian pro-Ukrainian units, to launch incursions into Novaya Tobuzhanka towards the other border villages in Belgorod, which these incursions took place right at that point of the early Ukrainian incursions. So, yeah, it definitely serves a very important purpose, and its results are very obvious both in the east and in the north.
You bring up a good point in that about false goals. This is something we see more and more and more in the informational space, but then can affect, of course, because I think there is a malignancy at the moment that information is affecting sound tactical decision. And I've spoken to this often, that military operation needs to be supported by propaganda, not in the reverse. You can't have propaganda actually affecting military strategy and tactics. That your command need to be able to see through what is just informational war and what is sound tactical decision. And I think there is a crossover that is effect on this. But you bring up that false goal, and this is something that I see shared everywhere, is particularly the Ukrainian side, because the Russians are on the offensive. I'm sure we'd see it the other way if Ukraine was on the offensive, is something, words to the effect of, Russia has a goal to capture Pokrovsk by November the 1st, setting a goal that is not being set. Therefore, when that comes and goes, you can then create, through the world's media and the politicians and then all the bloggers, you can then create a false failure. Do you see that as well?
Oh my God, it is everywhere. It is with basically every part of the front line. these random analysts on Telegram, these very small channels, will all of a sudden they'll post these messages, these pro-Ukraine accounts or any other Western outlet who cherry pick information will find that, start spreading it everywhere as people saying this is Russia's goals, this is what they're trying to do, not provide any proof or reasoning or logic to support that. And then when Russia obviously doesn't reach that goal because it's not their goal, like you said, it's all portrayed as a massive Russian failure of the offensive. And what I like to point out is that Russia doesn't do individual offensives. They don't do a summer offensive, then a winter offensive. They don't stop in between. In attritional warfare, it is a big grinding push, and advances are a byproduct of successful attrition. So many factors play into that. One example would be Garand production, or another would be increased FPV drone strikes or KAB strikes, lowering of morale, lack of Ukrainian recruitments, voluntary recruitments, I should say. And there are so many factors which play into that attrition, and that attrition then results in those kilometers squared being made. Obviously, there are some areas where Russia does actively try to take key positions without it being a byproduct directly of attrition. And those areas often they don't do as well, but which is interesting. But yeah, those false goals do very well propaganda-wise, and people fail to realize that this is not one offensive in one area, and then they stop and they start again, then they stop. It's frontline wide, constant, non-stop attrition, and then the advances reflect that, as well as other uncontrollable variables such as weather conditions or seasons changing. So absolutely, I see that everywhere. And obviously the most infamous one of that is the Kyiv in 3 days claim, which I always find so funny because it's tricked so many people with the General Miley's, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, interview with Fox News. I think it was on February 21st. He did an interview with Fox News, and he said Russia can probably take Kyiv in 3 days if they invade Ukraine. Now, this was the day before Russia officially put troops into the DPR and LPR. Obviously, they already had soldiers there beforehand, but when they officially announced the recognition of the DPR and LPR, this was 1 day before that. So they were still not certain if Russia was going to invade or not, because they'd done their thing where they're pretending to withdraw from the border regions. And the Russian MOD put out those videos of pretending it's exercises instead of preparations for an invasion. So it wasn't certain yet. There was still debates on whether Russia would actually invade, and there was a good portion of people who were arguing that there is not going to be a war. So he was saying that theoretically, if Russia invaded Ukraine, they would take Kyiv in 3 days. And then from there, everyone started repeating it. Russian propagandists, Ukrainian propagandists, or I should say Ukrainian propagandists were after it became obvious that wasn't going to happen. But yeah, Russian propagandists especially, a lot of bloggers, pro-Russian bloggers, all the sorts. And then when that didn't happen, for some reason, it might have been some sort of like what's the effect called? I forgot the name of the effect. The effect where you swear this happened or something was like this, but it actually wasn't, and everyone universally thinks that.
Yeah, it's like how you think the Monopoly man has a
yes, that's one
eyeglass.
Yeah, exactly like that. I think it's that effect, because now I see everywhere people saying the Kremlin and Putin put out statements predicting that they would take Kyiv in 3 days, and the Russian government never once put out any statements about goals or timelines, I should say, for Ukraine. And it just blows my mind that people still believe that, even when the evidence is presented to them. And that is the original case of that. And I think it'll be a very solid case study in the future for that form of informational warfare, because it was so effective. And then following that, we saw those smaller examples of, people saying Russia's trying to take Pokrovsk by the end of summer, or Russia's going to try and take Kharkiv by X date after launching the incursion to Volchansk. And it's incredibly interesting to see how quickly that spread.
Well, there's just a complete misunderstanding, I think purposefully, of how attritional warfare works. That attritional warfare is far more holistic than other forms of warfare. And it's about pressure, and it's tactics leading to operational victories. That leads into strategic victories. Therefore, you can then influence political outcomes. But the holistic nature of a traditional war is the acceptance of time, acceptance of victory and failure as well, that they can both be running in Schrodinger's box at the same time, but still on the ultimate objective of then influencing political decisions as the outcome, and that war is politics by other means. And we see that war is just a blunt force instrument. Now, the West will like to say again and again that war is not used in the modern day as a form of politics. And what I say is, well, that's ridiculous, because we do the same thing. I'm not then trying to justify war, but saying that states now don't see war as a blunt force tool of politics is completely ridiculous. But that is what we see in this whole. I think that one thing we have seen with the Russian forces develop, and the head of the head of one of the senior members of the SRC, which is the Swiss intelligence, he speaks about this nature of not fighting wars as if they're battles, but fighting wars as if it's one ongoing large operation that may have failures within it, that will have high loss, but it's an overall operation. And this has been Dr. Raman's main criticism of if the West and China stepped into a war, is the West do fight wars as if they're individual battles, not as an entire operation. And that is one of the things I think people are misunderstanding about the attritional nature of war, is how this is an ongoing, it's not a set of images, it's a video. It's a video made up at 30 frames a second. And I often say you could absolutely be victorious in an attritional war while losing ground every day, if you conduct elastic defense. So, but I think there's this complete misunderstanding of what the form of war is. There's still this idea that this is a positional war with maneuver elements. And what I say is, I don't think that there's no excuse at the moment for these people, so-called analysts, to not understand how attritional warfare works. It's actually fairly simple. And I try and share as much information about this as possible, because once you go through and you understand, even to a low level, how a war like this is fought, you'll just look at, oh shit, okay. And I go through all the time about, before you launch your secondary operations in an attritional war, these are the sectors of which you need to meet, and you can basically tick them off and go, okay, then 23 counteroffensive should never have been launched. We see the acceptance of Putin into attritional war, because in May 24, if I'm correct, puts an economist as the head of the forces, because that's how wars like this need to sustain. That's their weak point. The misunderstanding here around attrition is unbelievable. But in my opinion, people do understand it. But if they explain that, it doesn't fit the narrative of what they want to maybe push, or that their audience then want to watch. What do you think are the most misunderstood elements of this war?
Definitely the most misunderstood is advances, just as a concept. Advances, why they happen, what they mean for the future. Like we were talking about before with the linear warfare. I think so many people assume that, because they might not even think of it as linear, but just that so many people assume that just because Russia has taken a lot of casualties trying to take Pokrovsk, and will take a lot more casualties trying to take Donbass, that Ukraine's new defensive lines that they'll keep building are going to stop and delay them, and it's going to take decades for Russia to advance, even if it's not linear. And I think people need to realize that in an attritional war, there aren't always going to be soldiers there to defend the fortifications. Drones are great and all, but soldiers and infantry are the most crucial part of a war, even when drones are so important. and for Ukraine. Because I personally believe if Ukraine had 0 FPV drones, they would have collapsed last year, or maybe earlier this year. I think the war would be over by now. Russia would be in Kyiv if Ukraine did not have drones, and I strongly believe that because they rely on it so much with their critical and sometimes catastrophic, quoting deep state, in some areas of the front line, such as shortages of troops in some areas of the front line, such as in Pokrovsk. And yeah, I think people assume that there's always going to be enough soldiers to hold a new defensive line and a new defensive line, and they don't understand that there are not enough people in Ukraine who are able to fight and will fight and fight effectively. That is, to keep the war up, because that's the goal of attrition. The goal of attrition is to wear down your enemy to the point where they cannot fight anymore, and then you just roll through. And I think that's what's gonna happen. People saying, what about when Russia reaches Pavlograd or Kharkiv or Sumy or Poltava? How they're going to take those mega cities compared to Pokrovsk and smaller cities like Avdiivka and Bakhmut? Well, they aren't going to have to fight for them, because I think by the time Russia even reaches even Pavlograd and eastern Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, I don't think there's going to be a Ukrainian army to fight them. I think it's going to happen very quickly and very unexpectedly for a lot of people, and it's just going to disintegrate. And because there's just not going to be enough people, there's not going to be enough even fortifications in some areas, and with the Russian superiority in air power, artillery, even drones now, almost every aspect of the war except for video editing, they're going to be able to just kind of slice through like it's like a hot knife through butter. There's not going to be any meaningful resistance to stop them, and Ukraine will have their hand forced to negotiate. Yeah, it's going to be quick, and it's going to be very surreal, I think.
This is what I speak of the theory of bankruptcy, that you go bankrupt very slowly and then all at once. That you're overspending on your credit card, you're putting money on the trots, and you're doing this and doing that, and you don't really notice it until it falls off a cliff. And that's what I speak about, and that you have explained very well, very eloquently, is the form of attritional war. That you can have a front barely move, and next thing it falls off a cliff. And that is, and I've said that once it gets to that point, that's when, of course, your disparity in ability to negotiate isn't, it's already not close, but where it becomes then massive. And we know how someone like Mr. President Donald Trump will actually see that. But yes, that idea that eventually things are going to fall off a cliff, we know, and this is what I've always called. I remember I was sitting in Bakhmut in maybe late 22, and I was saying this to a friend at the time, saying this war is always on the eve of ending. It could be tomorrow, or it could be in 3 years. You can't pick where that point is, but we know at all times we are moving in the direction of that point before we fall off that event horizon, before we fall down that bankruptcy of which there is no a point of no return for ground being made. And at this point in time, given the state of the forces in the field and how it will look, to quote Mr. Surge, of how it'll be fought to its conclusion, it does appear as if we are moving and marching forward towards that at all times. What do you think in the next, say, 12 months, the future of the war then will bring us?
I think that's going to depend a lot on whether the war is very close to ending or relatively close to ending in 12 months. I think it's going to depend a lot on the Ukrainian policy and Zelensky's policy towards mobilization. I think if Zelensky is able to pass a law, which he is somewhat against from what I've heard, whereas the opposition in Ukraine and the Rada is more for it, he's somewhat against lowering the mobilization age to 23 and then 18. I think if it's lowered to 18 for all of Ukraine, because it was already effectively 18 in the east anyway, but for the rest of Ukraine, if it's lowered to 18, then I think it's going to be delayed just because of the sad fact that there's going to be a lot of meat available, a lot more meat that hasn't been tapped into by Zelensky's government, and there are going to be a lot of desperate attempts at counterattacks. There are going to be a lot of it's going to be terrible coordination. There's going to be a lot of young soldiers, unexperienced, low on morale, not sure what they're doing, little to no training. You know, essentially kids, and they're not going to put up resistance, and they will delay the sheer fact that there is more manpower in attritional war. Obviously, you need numbers, lots and lots of just sheer quantity of things is very important. So just by the fact that Ukraine may have much more soldiers at their disposal, I think could delay the inevitable by even several months, possibly, or a few months. It all depends on current tactics. Ukraine employs adapting to the changing realities at the front, which they have done in some areas, like with fortifications. Their fortifications are being built much better than they were last year or the year before. They're actually putting proper effort into their defensive lines, but obviously there's a further west now, so they aren't properly used yet. But how do I put this? There's going to be a lot of soldiers who will be able to delay, who are able to delay it, and that combined with possible changes in tactics by the Ukrainian command could push the end of the war back a bit. But if that doesn't happen, and if the war continues as it is, there's no significant additional mobilization of different age groups. I think by 12 months from now, I think we will be seeing the end days of the war, where Donbass is almost captured. The Russians will be have the advantage in every sector. They will be able to push pretty much anywhere they want to simultaneously. There'll be multiple incursions zones over the international border. There'll be mass evacuations from Kharkiv and Dnipropetrovsk and Chernihiv and Sumy, and it'll become very obvious to most people. But if there is significant changes in mobilization policy, if there are additional changes in tactics and adaptations to the changing realities on the front line, it could almost be relatively similar to what we see now. Because, like I said, I think it's going to be very sudden and very unexpected in how this war changes. We could even, like 12 months from now, we could see somewhat more Russian initiative and ability to make progress with the front lines just a bit further west. It really depends, but I think a lot of this is going to become apparent in the coming months of how this war is going to last into the 2026 and early 2027.
But do you see that as inevitable either way, regardless of mobilization?
Yes, 100% is inevitable. Unless there was some sort of revolutionary change in, like, unexpected, practically impossible revolutionary change in Western policy or tactics. It is effectively certain what's going to happen, because I don't believe there's going to be peace negotiations. That's the only other possibility which could happen. I don't think there's going to be peace negotiations. I don't think the West would allow meaningful peace negotiations to be created. I don't think it works in their favor. There's a reason why Ukraine gets so much aid, and it's not because they're the West ally, I can tell you that. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be peace negotiations. But if there is, hypothetically, then yeah, I think I don't think Russia would need to would need to go any further than the 4 oblasts in Crimea. But like I said, I see that as being highly unlikely.
The mobilization worries me. I understand the theory of it. Anyone who watches me knows I am vehemently against conscription. I believe it's up to the state to create an environment of which people will volunteer to die for said state. And right now, say if Australia would go to war, I'd be very concerned that a lot of people would go, well, even though I fought, I'm not signing up again. Or if I've with people who fought in wars in the Middle East, because the environment has not been created to fight. And of course, this leads into, of course, the willingness to fight on the front line, which is what people massively don't talk about with conscription, because Ukraine also has a massive problem with people going AWOL off the front line, or desertion in the like 7,000 a month or whatever it might be. People don't talk about the willingness, but then to look at the training aspect, what I say is, as a former infantryman, to get people to the limit to fight in a war that is the most challenging environment of war that we have ever seen. It's the most challenging environment because it's a completely three-dimensional environment with drones, even an underground environment with the tunnels and other systems. You have a 24-hour battlefield with top-of-the-line night fighting equipment, from thermals to your traditional night vision equipment. Your 24-hour battlefield, three-dimensional battlefield, the full time, that to get people to any point of which they will have any meaningful effect on the front line is going to be many months of training. Like, I'm talking as someone who's been through this pipeline of training before, for far less challenging battlefields, not being competent for a minimum of like 9 months. And what I say is, even if that decision were made right now, we would not see the effect on battlefield unless they were thrown as meat onto the battlefield for 12 months. And this is why I've been saying is Mr. Valery Zaluzny, he was completely correct at the failure of the 23 counteroffensive to then look at wanting 500,000 men conscripted, because what we would see is, if that occurred, we would see the byproduct of that right now if it went through the correct pipeline before things had fallen apart. And that that low to no training, of which we have seen on both the Russian and Ukrainian forces, has been a huge concern of men thrown into this battle. But as far as ending, where do you think, and I don't know, this is a prediction and people may clip this or whatever, but this is just, spitballing. Where do you think that the war is going to stop? Like, where do you think that border is going to eventually sit? Because most of the people I talk to behind the scenes, what they say is, when you've got historically a war like this of sides that hate each other, it will continue until you reach a physical barrier, not a fortification, but something physical. And most people I talk to, they still say, although we are so far away from it, the linear warfare bros will say 200 years, they will say, we still don't see that the 4 oblasts plus Crimea that Putin has annexed. No, it's still going to be the Dnieper River. Where do you see that once everything is, once the guns actually fall silent?
I think the war itself is going to end along the river, the Dnieper River, for the most part. I'm kind of torn between Western possible involvement after that. I guess it would depend on Russia's public stance and strength of statements towards it. But if the West is not involved, just completely disconnects itself with Ukraine fully, or the remnants of Ukraine fully, by the time the war ends, doesn't care about it anymore, which I don't know if that would happen. I think there's a lot of argument to be made against that. But hypothetically, if they did, I think Russia would take Kherson, Crimea, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk oblasts. They would withdraw from the Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, Sumy, and all of the other regions which they'd entered, and there would be some sort of government change in Kyiv. Ukraine would commit to being a neutral state. They would not join NATO. There could be something said about EU, maybe, I don't know, but and they would reduce the size of their military to a set number, like, I don't know, 50,000 or 100,000 maybe. That would be if the West does not intervene in Western Ukraine. If the West does intervene in Western Ukraine, I think Russia would annex everything east of the river, plus Kherson and possibly Mykolaiv and Odessa.
Yeah, it's fun. It's good. It's interesting to hear where different analysts speak on this. And what I will say is, you're in line with most of the people that I speak to behind the scenes on this. Now, a topic which is fairly taboo, although completely celebrated by some. Some have it in the introduction of their video every single day, is casualties. Now, I'm not going to ask what you think the casualty figures are, unless you'd like to share that. But what do you think that the ratio of casualties is likely that we've seen throughout the battle sequence of this war?
I think in the early days it was very much more Russian casualties than Ukraine. I think up until the 2023 counteroffensive, Russian casualties, even after the 2023 counteroffensive, I think they were 1.5 to 1 in Russia to Ukraine. I think since 2023 into 2024 with Kursk, the rest of the Bakhmut counterattacks, the increase in Russian production of glide bombs and usage of artillery, drones, all of it, Iskander strikes on rear targets, massive skyrocketing increases in production of Garan drones and other longer range UAVs. I think since the beginning of this year, possibly even end of 2024, I think it's crossed over to the point where Ukraine is taking more casualties than Russia. And as of now, I estimate it to be somewhere around 1.3 to 1, Ukraine to Russia. Just because I think Russia's on the offensive, I think they are still taking a lot of casualties, just because they've been on the offensive for so long and have not really stopped once. While Ukraine's casualties are rising faster than Russia's because Russia is facing less resistance on the ground from Ukrainian soldiers due to Ukraine's manpower shortages, while Ukraine's taking more casualties because Russia's increase in production of glide bombs, increase in usage of glide bombs, artillery, all of those weapons, drones, killing more Ukrainian soldiers, plus their counterattacks, which they've been doing more frequently.
Yes. And this is something that needs to be remembered too, is the sequence of battle. So say Pokrovsk, and this is something I've spoken about before, is say at a battle like once you enter Pokrovsk or right on the outskirts, it is completely rational to assume that the force on the offensive will take higher casualties. But the Battle of Pokrovsk is not what we see right now. The sequence of battles started months ago, many months ago, when we started seeing building on the flanks. And people need to remember too that there is a period of time when the only casualties within Pokrovsk, like within the city, were only Ukrainian from things like MLRS as well as glide munitions heading in. And that you need to look at a battle sequence, and there are points of which in this battle sequence of when there will be higher casualties for the defending force, higher casualties for the offensive force. And I've even seen people say, even if each glide bomb were to only kill one person, your casualties are astronomical. That it grows is huge. And those glide bombs, of course, I say, as far as weapon systems that I've seen actually change the nature of the battlefield, I think that is right up there with the most influential weapon systems that we have seen.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Russia's launching, I mean, based on reports from the Ukrainian, different Ukrainian local administrations and reports, from the battlefield, I'd say Russia's launching 200 to 300 glide bombs daily. Whereas, pre-Avdiivka, they were probably launching, I don't even know, it might even be a tenth of that. And it's just skyrocketed since Avdiivka. And it's spread out across the whole front line. And now they have their long-range rocket-powered Grom E1 glide bombs, which can fly for up to 200 kilometers, possibly even more. Maybe endangering Kyiv soon. I mean, yeah, that has been if there is any weapon in this war that's been a game changer, it has been the duo of glide bomb plus U-34, and yeah, it has changed more than any weapon the West could ever give to Ukraine, unless it was nukes, I think.
Well, that is the only wonder off is nuclear weapons, isn't it? Because that changes the level of cost to yourself unbelievably. AMK mapping, what is next for yourself, I guess, in your professional career of this?
Well, I plan to keep covering the war in Ukraine as to its conclusion. I plan to keep my coverage as objective as possible until its conclusion. Since last year, early last year, for the last year and a half, 2 years, I've been publishing a bit more info about the Middle East, Gaza, West Bank, the two main things I cover the most. I also covered Syria during the before the collapse of Assad, and then including the collapse of Assad. And I briefly covered Myanmar and Sudan for a while. But I do plan, once the war in Ukraine's over, I think I would want to keep using maps to visualize and make things easier to understand in other parts of the world, such as the Middle East, because I have a Middle East map which I use for Gaza and West Bank reports, and Syria, and other conflicts which may arise, other geopolitical hotspots, things of that sort. And obviously, I also want to, in the future, once the war's over, I want to cover the geopolitical consequences of the war in Ukraine, any potential fallout, changes in Ukrainian government and society, changes in Russian government and society, changes in opinion, possibly opinion polls. Other areas in Eastern Europe, Poland, Romania, what their stance or their reactions might be, the Baltic states, Belarus. I mean, just see the consequences of that and talk about that, I think. But yeah, it depends on what will happen, and I still want to focus, for me personally, focus on maps, just because that's the easiest way I find to publish information, and the most, I think, effective way of getting a point across and making it easier to understand.
Yes. Yeah, but mate, look, all the best too. You bring up an interesting point in that about the geopolitical consequences of this war. And this war hasn't changed where the world was heading, but it's hit the NOS buttons on the speed that this is occurring, of this division between the global south and the west, and countries looking to both de-dollarize as well, along with the war in Gaza, around how people see the hypocrisy of said rules-based order, and therefore states moving away from Western influence, both policy and monetary too. Now, I don't believe this is a new thing. This has been happening for some time, of course, with China at the helm, but these wars have absolutely sped that up drastically.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there have also been other, even with the major changes for the global south, there have also been big events which have happened as a result of the war in Ukraine, which work in favor of the West, or the West's geopolitical ambitions, such as the fall of Assad was a big one. Iran being hit very hard during the 12-day war. I think it was 12 days. Israel being more emboldened, and now we're seeing events unfold in Mali with the blockade around the capital, and Russia not having the resources to help Bamako in their fight against the different Islamist insurgencies and separatists in Mali, which is obviously a very crucial part of Africa, which Russia would want to have influence over. We may see things in the future, such as in the Central African Republic with the gold mines, which Wagner controls. There could be some potential Western influence happen there in the future, for we know there. There's all sorts of things which could happen in the future, which could be a direct result or an indirect result of Russia being so focused on the war in Ukraine. And it's definitely bought the West some time to focus on issues other than Russia. I think as there's more and more stronger and stronger areas in opposition to Western ambitions.
Yes, as well as, people have spoken about this at length, that a protracted war like this, although the guns may fall silent, is very likely to continue into other theatres via proxy, which and I completely see this war transitioning. Of once the war in Europe is over, it will just transition to continue the fight in another state to try and reduce the power of other great states, which is what we've seen historically
as well. Oh, definitely, yeah. And this whole thing's a great power war, effectively. I mean, Ukraine's America's proxy, and before the war, the DPR and LPR were Russia's proxies, and now Russia's engaging them directly. And yeah, it is effectively a great power war just through a proxy such as Ukraine. And I agree. I do think we'll see additional proxy wars be opened up. Maybe even proxy wars from proxies. I mean, there's so much that could happen as a result of this war and globalization.
Yes. Well, Mr. AMK, is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to go over in this?
I don't think so. I think we've covered all the stuff you wanted to cover. I can't think of anything specific. I'm sure I'll think of something in like 2 hours' time.
Mate, well, honestly, anytime I know my audience is a fan of your work, then you're highly requested to come on this channel, and I massively appreciate you taking a couple of hours out of your day to speak with me. Thank you very much, and of course, you're welcome back on at any point. Also, even if you just want to give a 10-minute overview of a situation, we can tap that onto a daily video or separate or whatever. So mate, huge thank you, and thank you as well for being, although you and I don't obviously agree on everything, for being one of the very few remaining rational voices in the war. There are very few, I think, remaining people have just fallen into comfort traps of believing their own pseudo environment that has been created.
Yeah, I agree. It's not very popular, I have to say, to try and to tell things objectively and neutrally. People will label other people as or bloggers or analysts as neutral, but a lot of those people are still pushing a narrative, and it's interesting, and it's difficult to kind of navigate this space now. I think it's only going to get worse, unfortunately, as we progress further through this war.
Especially with influence from bots and astroturfing bots and
100%.
AI and everything, that's just going to make this unbelievable. And as people get more desperate to hold on to their ideology and what they've said, because for a lot of these people, maintaining what they've said will become existential. It'll be existential for their career on YouTube, of which they make $3 million a year. If they start changing their tone, people will go, well, this is not what I was here for, and leave. Lastly, I see this every time. Who's paying Mr. AMK mapping?
It's the this is what people like to say now. It's the FSB branch of New Zealand. Where we actually have a specialized FSB branch in New Zealand. It's centered in Auckland, and they do payouts to people like me. You get 1 ruble every 100 views.
Yeah, mate, and I pushed back on someone saying this the other day, and I said, look, Australia, we just had a big problem with someone who was ex-Signals Directorate, who was basically compromised by Russia, that it looked like, at least. The funny thing was, his name was, well, they refer to him in the article as Mr. Williams, so that doesn't look great, but I believe his name is Peter Williams. But what I said is the New Zealanders and the Australians in their intelligence work unbelievably close. And I pushed back the other day and said, honestly, if someone as public as AMK was compromised, trust me, they'd know. And they are absolutely looking into all of this at the moment through that intelligence space because of recent events. But if then you're not being paid by one of these foreign intelligence services, how can people then support your work moving forwards?
Well, honestly, just reading and engaging with my posts is really helpful, because it boosts me in the algorithm. It seems like every other day, Twitter is throttling my reach for about 12 hours at a time. It gets cut by about 2/3 for a period of time, then it immediately goes back. I don't know why that is. It's probably an algorithmic issue, but yeah, engaging with my posts. I do also have a Buy Me a Coffee page linked in my Telegram and Twitter for those who want to financially support me, but that's just obviously optional, and I don't ask anyone like to do that. It's just another outlet for people who wish to do so. But yeah, just engaging and reading my posts, it's more than I can ask for, because it's surreal to me how I've managed to gain a proper audience after doing this for so long. It's really great to see.
It was in the Israeli-Iran 12-day war. That's when I think your following went up massively.
On Telegram, it doubled in like 5 days, but Twitter, I gained most of my following actually due to the NAFO doxing thing in early to mid last year. It gave me quite a bit of exposure, and then I kept riding that wave through to early this year. But yeah, the Israel-Iran thing did promote me to some new audiences. But yeah. Before that, there were some other things too which helped. But it's been really surreal seeing how that's progressed and the community I managed to build.
Great, mate. Have a fantastic day. Look after yourself. And look, anytime you're welcome, and we'll stay in touch.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, mate. Bye.
Bye.